I don't know how I feel about Treehouse of Horror 17. There were some good bits in all three of the stories, but none of them I loved. This is the fourth episode of the 18th season of The Simpsons, directed by Matthew Faughnan, and as always we have a series of narratives, and I will go through each of them without giving any spoilers, but obviously I'll talk a little bit about what their main focuses are. The intro was okay. I didn't love it. It was well animated. I really enjoyed the actual animation of it and the movement through the corridors, but in terms of it being fun or creative or quirky, well, I liked Moe's involvement. But I won't say any more than that. The three narratives. The first one is Married to the Blob, which is obviously a parody of the Blob, and Homer is the Blob. With the Blob, the more it eats, the bigger it gets, and this is what we have with Homer. And the more he eats, the bigger he gets, and he becomes this giant blob character. And visually, it was fine. And we had Dr. Phil, voiced by Dr. Phil, which I loved. I thought that was pretty great. I'm quite a fan of Dr. Phil. So that bit I liked, and visually I liked the appearance of Homer. But in terms of the actual events of the narrative, I didn't care for it. Then we have You Gotta Know When to Golem, and I have to thank the episode for teaching me about the Golem of Prague. It rings a faint bell. I feel like it's something I'd heard of before. It sounded kind of familiar, but certainly I couldn't remember it in any detail. So I did some Googling afterwards, and the Golem of Prague is this creature from Jewish mythology. And in this episode, it's relatively interesting. Again, it's not amazing, but basically you give this golem instructions, it carries these things out. I really like the design of it. I think the episode was interesting enough, but they could have been a bit more creative with what the golem did. However, I don't know how accurate the portrayal of the golem is. I don't know how accurate it is in terms of the way it looks. I mean, I saw some pictures and things, but I don't know if it's completely an accurate representation. So I have to take this with a pinch of salt. I think it's quite a big risk to put I'm going to say a famous creature, that's not right, but a mythological creature from Jewish lore and put it into an episode of Treehouse of Horror. I feel like that's a big gamble, and I can't say whether or not it paid off because I'm not in the position to get offended by it. So if you are Jewish, or if you know somebody who's Jewish, how does that segment go down? There are also there are a couple of really offensive remarks in this, and I'm not the kind of person who gets annoyed at offensive things in The Simpsons. There are things that are potentially offensive to me in episodes, and I just don't care because I know they don't do it with true malice. But it is worth pointing out that in this one there are offensive remarks about Germans, about Jewish people, and about the Irish. And I just feel like they were really pushing the boat out in this episode with potentially being offensive. Again, I'm not offended, and if there were remarks about Scottish people, which, you know, obviously with Groundskeeper Willie it happens quite a lot, I don't get offended. But I know that some people might, and I just think this episode definitely took a few risks. So You Gotta Know When to Golem it's alright. The third one I didn't really care for, but it's based on truth, and I also think it's very well animated. This is The Day the Earth Looks Stupid, and Orson Welles, voiced by the brilliant Maurice LaMarche, who voices Mortimer Mouse, is voicing Orson Welles. The radio broadcast of the War of the Worlds. People in Springfield think that it's actually an alien invasion. This is based on a true broadcast of the War of the Worlds. So I thought that was kind of fun, that they're actually depicting kind of a true event, but in an episode of Treehouse of Horror, obviously they're taking things a little bit more extreme and having a bit more fun with it. And the whole rolling around in mud thing, I thought it played out brilliantly. But honestly, I didn't love it. It wasn't amazing. It didn't fill me up with happiness. I didn't come away from this segment thinking that's a contender for the best ever. And it's really unusual because usually with Treehouse of Horror, there's at least one segment, one story where I go, that means this was an amazing episode. Even if the other two segments are weak, there's usually at least one that I love. And honestly, there isn't. There are bits I liked about all of them. Married to the Blob, visually it was pretty good, and Dr. Phil's awesome. You Gotta Know When to Golem taught me about the Golem of Prague, and it was interesting as a concept, but again, I'm not entirely sure how I feel about it. And then The Day the Earth Looked Stupid, I liked how it was animated. I like the fact that it's based on true events, but I just felt like the actual narrative, the way it played out, wasn't that interesting. So I think I have to sum up by saying that Treehouse of Horror 17 is not in itself a bad episode, but compared to other Treehouse of Horrors, it's actually pretty weak.